now. I also want to give a shout out about this beautiful template that I had never seen before, and I'm just so delighted about that Sherry Bruns from Hutchinson helped us put together. So thank you, Sherry. So I also want to know your secret for where you find all these pretty templates. We'll get started here. So I'm Patsy. I direct Atlas, housed at Hamline University, and we have put this webinar together with a handful of your colleagues from across the state. And it's a result of a subgroup of the statewide professional development advisory committee, and we have a handful of people who've been helping us think about how we can really help serve some of you who work in these really difficult and challenging contexts where you're serving multiple levels all the time and at one time. And so this is a result of some of the discussions that we've had, and we're glad to have a chance to share some of our expertise here. So a couple of people, it sounds like, can't hear. Brad will help you out. Sounds like most of you can though, so I am just going to proceed. So first of all, we want to just do a little chat, help you find your chat box, wake everybody up here and get us into this topic. So what is meant by a routine, and why is it important to a one-room schoolhouse? So I'm going to let a couple of people just chat into, actually all of you, that would be great, chat into the chat box what to you is meant by a routine, and why is it important for a one-room schoolhouse? So find your chat box and let's hear from at least a couple of people. If you're not a person who likes to type much and you'd prefer to speak up, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. And we'll just set kind of calibrate our definition here of what is meant by a routine. So Elizabeth says something you do regularly that saves time. Absolutely. What else? Brenda offers a routine is a way of organizing class time, done in, that way each time, and brings students together and builds community. Oh, thank you for that. Absolutely. It's something that becomes a bit of a ritual, a tradition, something in your classroom that people can know to expect. It's something predictable and comforting that they know is happening each time they arrive to class. Good, thank you. Anyone else? Thoughts on what is a routine and why would it be important in particular for a one-room schoolhouse setting? So Joan offers it's a repeated practice that you perform each class time, important because it sets expectations for that day and each day. Oh, thank you for that. That's great. Thank you so much. All right, yeah, I would totally agree with that. We have a couple of quotes that I found one of them and Sherry found another that I want to share with you around routines in teaching. And one of them is routines give us a comfortable basis to stand on as we approach new challenges, either identifiable or unknown. So it kind of removes one layer of the onion, right? It's like you know the routine, but the content that you're teaching is new. Maybe you know this particular activity, it's a mingle, you know how to do a mingle. You might not know how to do it with the content you're learning, but you know how that works, right? Or maybe it's a particular worksheet or graphic organizer, something that they know how to do the actual task, but perhaps they're doing it with new academic content or career content. As Sherry says in the chat, I think routines can also create a sense of safety and belonging. Absolutely, and that connects to Brenda's idea of community. Brian offers it's something that is familiar from class to class that everyone involved knows a comfortable transition from the outside to class. That's a great observation. It helps kind of pull people in. Here's what we're doing now, transitioning from whatever just happened out in the world to what we're doing together as a group, or maybe just one-on-one with one teacher or tutor or volunteer. Great, thank you. So another handy quote that I found that I thought was particularly helpful was routines are the backbone of daily classroom life. They facilitate teaching and learning. Routines don't just make your life easier, they save valuable classroom time. And that's what's important. Efficient routines make it easier for students to learn and to achieve more, right? So yeah, I mean, similar to what many of you were just saying, it's a way of making your classroom run more smoothly. And of course, in a one-room schoolhouse, when smoothly is hard to achieve, this can be extremely helpful. So we have 3 presenters today who will be sharing some of their kind of best ideas. I'm sure there's lots more they could share. We've limited their time because we want to be sure and have, ideas from several different people. So no doubt each of them could fill 90 minutes, but in fact, we're only going to have them speak for a few minutes each and then have some time where we can reflect, ask questions, and think about what might work in your session or in your classroom as well. I'm getting a little feedback from someone. Just be sure to, if you're not speaking, to mute your line. Otherwise, we'll mute you from our end. So we'll go ahead and I'll introduce the guest speakers. So we've got Laura, who joins us from Bemidji. Let's just do a quick sound check. Laura, if you want to unmute and say hello.
Hello.
Yay, there you are. Thank you for joining us. Yes. And Sue from DOC Oak Park Heights, can you unmute and say hello?
Hello.
Yay, thanks for joining us, Sue. And finally, Elizabeth Bennet from American Indian OIC.
Hi, everyone.
Great. Oh, it's like all the stars have aligned. You all sound just great. So I'm glad this is all working out audio-wise. That's always the tricky part. So we'll have time to hear from each of these of ABE colleagues from different parts of the state and in very different contexts. And then we'll have some time at the end for some discussion. Okay. So we're going to start with Laura. So Laura, if you want to say a little bit about your setting, let us know, what it is you do and how it works up in Bemidji, and then just let me know when to move the slides along.
Yep, definitely. Well, hi, I work in Bemidji at Northwest Technical College, and that has just been a fantastic location for us. Our students get comfortable coming here, and many of them have gone on to take classes at the Tech, so we're really fortunate to be here. We have 25 students currently on our roster, and then something new that my coworker and I are doing this semester is we're each sitting in on a developmental ed class. So I've got a reading and writing class, and Corinne has a math class, so we've probably got another 20 or so combined students, and they've started coming into our classroom in between their classes, which has just been great. So more opportunities for them to get some extra help. We have a diverse group of students. Most of them come to us for their GEDs or adult diplomas, but we do have several English language learners right now. And there are two I haven't had. They're very, very basic English, and I haven't worked with anyone who's quite they've just been here a few months. They come from Brazil, and so it's been really wonderful to get to know them. Really a challenge, but that's been going well. I'm learning a lot. Let's see. We have people coming here for computer skills, raise their acupuncture scores, help studying for driver's tests. So just all sorts of stuff. And I always say it's one of the things I love most about this job is the variety, for sure. So, okay, let's move to the next slide. One of our most important routines starts right away, our intake routine. And I didn't upload the welcome checklist, I apologize, but we've got it's a two-sided kind of orientation checklist so that we can, because the way that things are now, we don't have a set time for people to come and register. It's kind of, if they come by, we kind of don't want to take the chance they won't come back. So we help them when they stop by. And most of the time it works out fine, but sometimes there are a million other things going on. So this checklist helps because it kind of ensures that we hit everything. Like I wrote on the slide, tour of the school, questions about how they learn best in a group by themselves. We kind of establish goals right away. We also do all the basic stuff like registration, different stuff they have to sign. We get their email address, and if they're interested in distance learning, then we try to get that started for them right away and kind of get them on it, make sure it all works. All right, next slide. And then I put a picture of my business card. We hand out our business cards, and you can see the flip side of it, and I kind of wanted to highlight again, the nature of our setting. We have our hours Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 4, and that's what we tell people when they come in. We don't, although we've tried, we don't have set GED classes. We've tried, and we couldn't quite get enough people coming at the same time consistently, not to the point where we were willing to kind of close off our room for a period of time to other people. But we're doing well. Our attendance is good. It keeps us busy for sure. So this kind of showing students the routine right away and having, like we already talked about, some of those quotes, Patsy, you highlighted, it gives us some common ground since there are people coming in kind of at all different times, working on different things. And of course, we have some students who are regular. They're there every day for a solid period of time, but then there are others who will come when they can, between jobs, family. Some have started taking classes here at NTC, want some of that extra support. So we're not exactly sure what to expect any given day. So these things help us. We have a sign-in sheet, time in, time out. We have a space for a 15-minute break. So especially students who are there every day for a long period of time. And we have one who's there pretty consistently, 8:30 when we open, and then she'll leave at 3 or 4. She'll stay. She has a husband and daughter who attend here too, so she puts in some extremely long days, earns some breaks. But they sign in. We have our student folders right up front. In the folders, there's a daily work log. And if anyone is interested in seeing some of this stuff, I wasn't able, like a lot of us, our plans got a little kind of off kilter with the cold, but I wasn't able to get back in here and get some of this stuff uploaded. I think I would have. But it's just kind of a basic, they sign in, they put the date, and then at the end of their session, they sign out, and then they kind of summarize what they worked on. So it's a good way to try to work in some self-management. It's a good way to review. Maybe they don't come in for a week or two, and so it's really good to be able to easily see, okay, this is what you were working on. And I put coffee on the list because that has ended up being our little coffee corner, which, Patsy, if you want to move to the next slide. This has been probably one of our most, and when I hear routine, when I think of routine, comfort is the word that comes to me most often. And this simple kind of little ritual, having coffee ready for students, having some treats, which they're the ones bringing them in. It's this unifying place where I've seen relationships started between students who are there for different goals, but it's just kind of a little gathering place, and it's really built camaraderie. We've even students who are working on different things, they get to know each other, and they'll jump in if we do vocabulary reviews or something like that. They're definitely pretty often, the whole class is in on something kind of together for a time. I forgot to put this on my little list here, but you can see in the picture we have a spot for classroom birthdays. And so that's when we'll bring in something to celebrate somebody's birthday. And we had the little boy ribbon disappeared, but we try to give them something to wear to kind of make it fun, kind of make it a little bit goofy. And they have the option too. Some people don't want a big deal made out of their birthday, so we kind of check with them first. The map has been, I tried to find a picture. I've got a great picture somewhere of two of my students looking together at the map, and that's been a great way to learn, of course, hear about these different lives. Student from Rwanda showing us where she lived, really spurring on a lot of interesting conversation. That's been great. The grammar joke, if you can see, that's kind of a classic one up there. Let's eat grandpa, or let's eat grandpa. I know one of my favorites. I have a t-shirt just like it, but it's Let's Eat Kitty t-shirt. But that's, and it's my goal actually. I want to start collecting these t-shirts as a different way to teach grammar. That can become a new routine. But all right, next slide, you can kind of see, and you'll notice probably early on, this is it's from 2017. Again, couldn't get in the last couple days to get a new picture, but you can see we've got an announcement section. And there's one, this was a while ago, so we had our one kind of first big success story, a student who got her adult diploma, and then she just finished, in fact, her second year at NTC. So that was really exciting. But since then, we have just added to it. We've got a man in our class who has been instrumental in getting Ruby's Pantry started in Bemidji, so there was an article about him. More Student of the Month at NTC who were our students. So that's a nice kind of ritual. People know that that's there. They'll notice if there's a new thing added. It's kind of a motivator too, I think. 2 years later here, things are a little bit less kind of chaotic. We've moved Math Minute over and then a Science Fact. That's on the next slide. To a separate, oh, no, not next slide, but that's okay. You'll see it after. And just kind of on a side note, and this is something I'm excited about, both my coworker and I are taking UDL this kind of semester, Universal Design for Learning. And I've heard so many good things about it, and I think that it's going to be really great for either solidifying some routines, and I'll talk about them more specifically here in just a minute, but solidifying those routines with curriculum. We need to change our room around anyway to allow for a smart board, and we've got a lot of stuff up. I mean, you saw that whiteboard. There's a lot. And I mean, people, it's kind of a gathering spot. They know where to look for stuff, but I know that there are some changes we can make, I think, for more optimal learning. The slides you're looking at, this is another kind of ritual routine. This is as students walk in our classroom door, we always have the date, and on this day in history, what happened on this day. And you can kind of see 2 years ago, it's maybe a bit more ambitious with it. We weren't using it to the extent that I'd wanted, but we were also putting up, we'd highlight one event and then put up all of these other, not necessarily secondary events, but just other things that had also happened on that day. And here and there, but not as a solid routine yet, I've kind of tried to use those as a springboard for students, either, practicing research, find some articles, let's learn more, stuff like that. So there are a lot of opportunities with this kind of routine, I think, for learning more content, gaining more knowledge, but also just kind of, exploring more with computer skills too, because they can get on there and find out more about what happened. Again, another unifying factor. This has spurred conversation before, of course. Some events on a given day are either more notable or interesting than others, and so it's kind of one of those tying things to tie the community together, common ground for students, even if they're doing different things or they're at different times. Okay, next slide, you'll see Math Minute and then a Science Fact, and we have that up every day and try to encourage students individually to come up. They'll fill in answers on the Math Minute, we'll erase them for another student, or many times students will kind of join in together, be working on it together. We'll have the whole class's attention for a while if we're explaining something, so that's helpful. These things also, and I didn't put an image, I think I've talked about everyday edits before if anyone's heard me talk or seen, and I mean, I know people use them, but that's a little passage. Those will often align with on this day in history, and I try to make them align so that it's building more knowledge. But it's a short little paragraph about whatever in that month. They're organized by months. Students find 10 errors, and then, and there are lots of different ways, of course, that you can use these in your classroom. And in fact, there's a link if you go to that website of ideas for how you can use it in the classroom. I'll get students together in a group if they happen to be working on it at the same time. I have them go through, see if they can find 10. Then we go through them together. And then I have started having them then type up the edited version, especially for some of my students who really need practice with the fluency of writing and sentence structure and whatnot. Vocabulary workouts, word wall. I'll mention just briefly, I think a lot of you know about those vocabulary workouts through the STAR program, actually, and they're on the Atlas website under vocabulary resources. Those are nice because there's one word highlighted on a page and just many different ways to work with that one word. And then I'll take those words, put them on the word wall, and then usually once a week for students, I won't give a workout. I'll just say, choose maybe 5 words from the word wall, use them as a sentence, or write a story, try to use as many words as you can, just ways to try to bring back those words in review. Okay, next slide. This is where kind of it's a a commonality for all students, but it's different for every student, I guess. I'm not sure how to say that. I guess different students, different individual work routines. We know we've got different learning styles, different schedules, different everything. And so one of our routines is to individually have students discover what works best for them. Another place where they can kind of gain some footing, because they've got their routines that everybody else does, signing in, grab some coffee, check out the day in history, learn more about it if you want. But then we definitely have some students who, when it's time for that independent time, they're not getting so much done. And I guess I've had several students lately where this has become a bigger factor. Plenty are very self-motivated. They don't need me to tell them what to do next. But for the ones who do, and I'll talk about that in a second, these checklists. But I have one student, and this was really unique, but he told me he needed something, and I was just so proud of him for speaking up and saying, like, hey, I need to do this to stay on track. And so he was working through language arts lessons out of Kaplan. And we kept telling him, let's shoot for 80%, and you need 70 whatever to pass the GED test, so let's go for 80. And so he created this graph for himself. So he would do a lesson, we'd grade it, and he'd mark the percentage he got, and then he'd try again if it ended up being under 80. And so that was something that worked for him and kept him on track, and that he did for the whole time he was studying for that test. I have another student, a few, who just know, like, we keep it very simple. They've got work in their folder, but, first typing or digital literacy. Then I'm going to work on reading. Then I'm going to work on math. And it's not written down, but that's just, we all know that that's the order. And then for these couple, I have a couple of teenage girls who started with us and they've got a lot of other stuff going on, a lot of concerns. They're in a group home situation right now. And so they come in and they really need a lot of guidance and a lot of kind of, this is what you need to do next, or they get off track very easily. And with our setting, the open lab, where we don't know who's in at any given time, and it gets busy, and it has really lately, I discovered I needed something more for them. And so next slide shows you an example of kind of individual checklist that I developed for one student, and it's worked well for her as her personal routine for her day-to-day work, that I'm trying to build it in for some other students who could use it. But she'll come in and be off for whatever reason, didn't get enough sleep, and so sometimes this choice that we've started giving her, where here are the things that need to be done, and that'll change. I've been doing it now weekly, unless she finishes a few things, and it'll change as it needs to, basically. But she can kind of go through, decide, okay, I don't feel like that right now, but I feel like this. But it helps keep her remembering, I need to stay on track, I need to do something, I'd better be checking. I've told her you have to get some stuff done, and you can choose in what order. So this has worked out really well as an individual routine for students. All right, and then last thing, I hope I have not taken too much time. I worry, like, how am I going to fill up 10 or 15 minutes? And I think I have. So I'll just end with this exit ticket that I've started using. I have to admit, it's not an ironclad routine for everybody yet. Sometimes, just depending on dynamics change, I've started it and stopped it, kind of thing. But it's been really useful for a few particular students, where it's just kind of a way to recap, force them to kind of reflect on, what did I do today? What do I remember? What do I want to remember? Give them a chance to either ask us questions about their routine, about their work, whatever, or just questions about the content. And then that last, thing you'd like to learn more about. So there again, I have many students who really are good advocators for themselves, just like, hey, I want to do this, or we haven't worked on this for a while. And so this is another way for them to kind of get that, make that known to us if things are particularly busy, or we forget to check in enough or ask or whatever. So yeah, these are some of our basic routines. We've had other ones that we want to start again. I know my coworker had done a weekly science experiment, and then I don't know what happened to that. That kind of fell away, but we want to get that back. We had a couple really cool sessions. And so, yeah, there's always, and I'm excited to learn from the other two presenters today, there's always stuff that I'm learning that I want to try. And it absolutely is important for a one-room schoolhouse because, again, like we've said, it gives our students common ground and just kind of a way to build community. And that is, I think, one of the most important things for retention, for persistence. They'll keep coming back if they feel comfortable. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura.
Yes,
wow.
You're welcome.
So many good things you've shared here. I'm impressed with all of the different routines that you've put together in your site, that it seemed to make things really go so much more smoothly. And I noted in the chat box a couple of times just how much crossover there is between these routines and setting up these routines and following through and teaching them. Also with all of these TIF skills. I mean, you're setting them up for really strong self-management, time management, materials management, goal setting, and then also this in particular, this ticket to leave as a reflection on their own learning, which is of course also a TIF skill. So really, yeah, Brenda says in the chat, really setting them up to be college students, which I think is just such a great observation, that you're really transitioning them from this ABE setting with skills that are going to set them up really nicely for college, for career training, or anything that they're doing next. I want to just take a moment to see if anyone has a question or a clarification or a comment for Laura before we move on. You're welcome to use the chat box if you like, or to use the little hand raiser guy. We can have you speak up if you'd like to. There were some, I'm sure you were busy speaking and didn't see some of the comments in the chat box that.
Yeah, I'm looking through them now.
Yeah, it's great that you're maintaining focus on accomplishing goals. They're seeing their own progress, someone mentioned. Yeah, lots of good things happening here. Anything anyone wants to clarify before we move to our next speaker? I had the good fortune of visiting Laura's site, October maybe? It wasn't too long ago, this fall.
Yeah.
And I got to see some of these many things in practice. And I loved the little coffee corner and seeing this, moment in history. Yeah, and Brenda mentions too, it'll be interesting to see what happens after UDL. So I think there's so much crossover, absolutely, with universal design. And will you still have word walls, right? I mean, one of the things, of course, with UDL is having things sometimes less on the wall. So it'll be interesting.
Well, and I know that's kind of why I made a joke with that board, because I'm like, looks like it's a good time for UDL. And my coworker's taking it too. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that'll be really nice. We can do this stuff together as we're learning.
Right. Well, and there's no problem with having word walls. It's just if it's being used, right? So then figure out if it's making sense and helpful to your learners, then you absolutely want it there. So interesting to see. All right. I'm getting a message from Brad that it seems like everyone's having okay audio experience here. So if you do continue to have any issues with audio, just you either chat to me or raise your hand and we can help you out. Great, thank you so much, Laura. Yeah, Brenda and Laura Malat also mentioned how grateful they are for your work. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
All right, well, Laura will stay on, and if there are questions later in the webinar, feel free to chat those out and we'll have some time for discussion after we've heard from everyone. But for the moment, we're going to move along and hear from Sue. Sue joins us from the Department of Corrections at Oak Park Heights. Sue, go ahead and let's make sure we can hear you.
Sure.
Perfect.
Can you?
Yes,
okay,
you sound great. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm very envious of Laura's coffee corner. I wish I could do that. No coffee corners, no treat corners in prison, unfortunately.
No, a little more constraints on your end, aren't there? But we're eager to hear what you have going on. So
thank you. And I just want to echo what Laura said about, all of us seem to have a lot of the same challenges. And although our routines are specifically shaped for the environments where we teach, I think the more we share, the better we'll all be. So I'm really happy to be part of this webinar because I need all the help I can get. My work site is the maximum security prison at Oak Park Heights, and I've been in my position for about 17 months. At Oak Park, all inmates who are able are required to have a job, and those jobs could be in the kitchen or the canteen, yard crew, janitorial, and being in school is also a job. In fact, if an offender doesn't have a high school diploma or a GED, the only job he can qualify for is to be a student. So you can go to the next slide. And this one illustrates the makeup of my two classes, which are split between students without a GED in the morning and students who do have high school credentials in the afternoon. So in other words, those attending in the morning are required to be in education, and those in the afternoon are not. And I put some score levels on there so you can see the academic levels. And the students in the morning are a little bit lower than those in the afternoon. Currently, 3 of my morning students speak no English, and 2 more are slightly more advanced ESL. And I also have 6 inmate tutors who work with me throughout both class periods, doing a variety of tasks to support students and assist me with whatever they can. And I'll talk more about something my tutors do that's very cool in a little bit. I think you can go ahead. I think that students in prison are similar in a lot of ways to students on the outside, but because my routines are very much shaped by who I teach, I wanted to touch on some of their characteristics. Like in any classroom, I have students who are reluctant and oppositional, and then I have others who are highly motivated and actively involved in learning. In fact, one of the things I found ironic is that some of my most dedicated students are those serving incredibly long or life sentences. And I think that's because education and learning give them some sense of control over their environment in a situation where they have so little control. Yeah, I kind of just outlined here. It's just a lot of students are different. For some of them, they come up mainly to socialize. Some of them just don't want to work in the kitchen or the canteen, and for others, it's an absolute. It's the highlight of their life. We also have frequent turnover. I lost 4 students and 1 tutor this week, so there's flux like there is in every ABE classroom. Speaking of control, I felt for a while after starting this job, because I was new to corrections, I came from a high school teaching career, that about half the time I was basically just flinging things at the wall hoping they'd stick. And the other half of the time I was drowning trying to keep track of what everyone in the room was doing. So the routines I'm going to talk about are less about what students do and more the things I do to keep myself focused and effective. You can go on to the next one. Can you hear me? Did I lose you?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear for a second. Okay, sorry. I'm going to share 3 routines that grew out of some of the 3 main challenges I have here. And the first is how I keep track of what I'm working on with each of the 3 academic levels. The second one is how I keep track of what each individual student is doing. And then the third is how I manage to still feel like a teacher in this very different environment. You can go on. This slide outlines my first routine, which is really just a brief and basic weekly outline of what the learning targets and the materials are for each level. I keep this as a running record so that I can look back if I need to and see what's been covered and what materials or warm-ups I've used. With so many different directions, I found it's kind of easy to forget what I've used from month to month. And the other thing I thought, it does help me plan forward and carry on a sequence for instruction. In prison, we often have class cancellations at the last minute and sometimes for extended periods due to staffing shortages or lockdowns. And this record helps me maintain continuity even if we have a gap in the schedule. So it seems little, but it's made a huge difference for me in terms of just moving from week to week with some kind of continuity. You can move on and I'll talk about my second routine. And this one is one I just started recently to ensure that I know what each student is doing and what he needs, which has been a huge problem for me for quite a while. there are so many people working on so many different individual things that it was just kind of hit and miss, and I kind of had enough of that. And so now every Monday I give each student a sheet with space for him to record information that's helpful to me, but it also keeps him accountable for his time and work completion. Much like what Laura talked about, it helps the students stay focused, and I think they are appreciating it. I can go through these really quickly at the end of class and then respond to student concerns or get materials ready for the next class period if they tell me what they need. You can see that I learned that it was someone's friggin' birthday today. I got this one yesterday. So they give me little notes like that too, and just kind of touch base sort of things, which is helpful. I also have them record the amount of time they spend working on the Aztec learning program and whether or not they sought help from a tutor. I feel like this has made me much more efficient and has the added benefit, of course, of involving them in monitoring their own progress, which in turn keeps them focused during this class period as well. I think you can move on to the third challenge, and that was that this one actually stems from my need to be a teacher rather than just a coach or a classroom manager, which it sometimes felt like in the beginning. I came from high school teaching, and I actually found I missed whole class instruction so much when I came to Oak Park Heights. Now, the interesting thing is my students made sure to tell me when I started that whole class instruction doesn't work in prison and that they don't listen when teachers lecture. And I believed them for a while, but then I decided to do it anyway. And I'm happy to say it does work, and they do listen. But I think that's because I laid groundwork before I started and established tight routines for the days when this is on the agenda. We can go on to the next one. I hope I got these in the right order. My students, I've found, are all, no matter what level they're at, they're in need of active reading strategies. And so I teach and model one reading strategy per lesson, and then I have my students practice it in small tutor-led groups using texts that are leveled so that the content is accessible to everyone. So for instance, with this particular strategy, I had them do some pre-reading and then some post-reading recording with a text called "In the U.S., the Day of the Dead is Becoming Big Business." And so I got an article from Newsy LA and modified it for my very lowest level so that it was accessible to the three groups that I was using this with. And then the tutors, after I taught the skill, they all had the same headline, so it was easy for them to work together and work with me in the whole class setting to fill out what I know and what I want to know. And then following the reading, they filled out the third row in their small groups with their tutors. And so that's been pretty effective. Let me see here if I wanted to say anything else about this one. I don't think so. You can move on to the next one. Now, I want to say that it is a little bit tricky to put adult male prisoners in small groups because these 5 issues are definitely factors here. And so it was a little edgy and a little risky, I thought, but I wanted to try it anyway because I believed in my students and I believed that they would trust that I wouldn't put them in a position that wasn't going to be comfortable and successful for them. So it did, in fact, work. I've always believed that relationships are really critical to learning, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to build the kind of trust with my students that allows them to do something I ask, even if they really don't want to. And so they have done the small group readings a number of times with the tutors, and it has been really amazing to see the work that these students do. Sometimes this is the only time they'll work during the whole week. I'm not really sure why it's so successful with them, but I think it's, again, they're led by a tutor that they're comfortable with, and they have an engaging text. And I think go to the next slide because that does tell a couple of the keys that I think to this activity. which one I would highly recommend this if it's at all possible, and I'm definitely going to do more of it, but I needed to find engaging, relevant texts for them. And I have 6 tutors, so I was able to put together 6 groups. Sometimes I had a bigger group with 2 tutors, just depended on the makeup of the class at the time. I also gave students a voice in who they worked with, because some students simply will not work with some other people. And so I let them tell me who they were comfortable with, also what tutor they wanted to work with, and that it worked out very well. They know the routine for them is that they know beforehand who they're going to work with, and so there's not a big surprise that day. I tell them the day before so they know that when they come in the room, they're going to move to their tutor groups and they're going to have this lesson. And beforehand, the day before, I'll teach the tutors the target so that they know what to do and how to support that once the students get into their practice groups. And so they're ready to go. My procedures for this is I start right away. Don't let them get started on anything else. We jump right into this, and I take no more than 10 minutes to do the whole class instruction. And then the practice will range from 30 to 40 minutes. For some groups it takes longer, others don't take very long. And so the wrap up cannot really be a whole class kind of pull it together at the end, but they can report out to me. And I think that also increases their comfort level to some degree. They aren't terribly confident with their reading and with their speaking in a larger group like this. So I think, I think from my perspective, routines just have been my survival key in this environment. And I think that the more routines my students have, well, I don't want to say that. I don't give them a lot of routines. I give them 3 or 4 that I think are absolutely necessary for our success, because they don't like to be told what to do. And so for me and for my class, this works really well. And I think that's probably about what I have to add.
Thank you so much. You've gotten some really positive comments in the chat. Laura says that this group time likely gives you some time to observe their interactions too and to monitor their progress.
It does, yes. Yes. I can circulate.
Yeah, so you have your basically like a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes of full group instruction, which is well set up and, they're primed for it. And then you can really do some monitoring during the group time, right?
Right, I can monitor and support. Yeah, it works real well.
That's great. And then a couple of really positive comments. People want to see that daily progress slip and are thinking of adding that to their routines as well. So
I certainly will.
Yeah, maybe that's something we could put up in the Schoology group as well. If there's a blank one that you can share that people can then, adapt for their own setting. I'll just pause here and let people kind of take this in for a moment and ask any clarifications they might have. And feel free to use the chat box. Is there something in particular that you're possibly thinking about right now or thinking of adapting for your classroom? Or do you have a question perhaps for Sue about her routines, something she shared, or her work in a very complex setting? We'll just put it that way. I had the opportunity to visit Oak Park Heights. It was before you began, if you only started a year and a half ago there. So I didn't have a chance to see you in action, but it was such an interesting visit to see an ABE setting unlike anything I had seen. Of course, I've been in several of the state facilities, but yours is different.
It is very different. It's challenging, but it's really rewarding and enjoyable. And I come back anytime.
Yeah, what I noticed too is that the classes had such a high degree of warmth, like the people that were so glad to be there. I really, that was like noticeable, even as a visitor to see that happening. And the use of tutors was really strong in the day I was there for sure. There were a lot of those volunteer tutors that were helping out. And that seemed to really make for a really, just a really pleasant time in there and productive, because they could really individualize the instruction because there were so many people on hand to help out.
And they know the dynamics of the individuals who are there. That it's very fun. It's a fun place. It's a fun place to teach.
Wow, neat. Well, we could have a webinar just on what it's like to work in that setting, but we'll have to do that another time. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm not seeing any other
Oh, thank
comments in
you.
the chat at the moment, but feel free as people have other things they want to ask Sue, then we'll have time at the end, of course, for some discussion. But I'm going to move on and ask Elizabeth to go ahead and unmute and speak up. We'll make sure we can hear you. Looks like you're muted on, there you go.
Hi there. Can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
I can. Thank you. All right, I'll let you go ahead, Elizabeth, and tell us a little bit about your setting, and then let me know when you want me to move the slides forward.
Sure, you can go to the next slide now. I think my one-room schoolhouse setting is a little different from most because I'm right in the middle of Minneapolis. We are a GED and ABE program within a larger nonprofit organization that also has an alternative high school, several post-secondary career training programs, MFIT case management, and other employment services to try to get people into living wage employment. As you can tell from our name, we were founded originally to serve the specific needs of the urban Native American community, but we really are open to everyone. We see students from like TABE, grade level equivalent, like third grade, on up through people who already have a diploma or GED and are working on bridging to post-secondary education. I would say about 2/3 of students in our GED program identify as American Indian. We also have quite a few ELL students. So really, I teach everything. Our students usually have at least one and sometimes several really significant barriers to completing their education. The one that's been on our minds a lot, especially the past few months, has been homelessness. There's that photo there of the Franklin Hiawatha homeless encampment that was literally just a few blocks down Franklin Avenue from our site, and the navigation center that was built to temporarily house a lot of the folks who were living there is right across the light rail tracks from our building. So housing has very much been on our minds, and even if our students have stable housing, they might be dealing with chemical dependency or have been formerly incarcerated, or have mental health challenges, or just in general have experienced historical or other trauma that tends to lead to distrust of institutions, and particularly educational institutions. I think many of my students have not had very positive experiences with their previous schooling. So next slide, please. To serve this population, we have a totally open enrollment and drop-in tutoring model. I'm there 3 days a week, and we have 2 other part-time teachers who also teach in our alternative high school most of the time. And we have some volunteer tutors who come in, but for the most part, it's just drop-in one-on-one tutoring and students studying independently on their own. Every day is different. I might see just 2 students a day, or I might see 20. Like, I never know what to expect. And the flexibility is really important for our students. We don't want them to stop out and then feel like, oh, I'm going to be kicked out and I can't go back because of my attendance. So we just say, set a schedule for yourself. You come in around your job and your other commitments, and you work at a pace that works for you. But of course, that's very challenging for me as the teacher then to establish routines and give people structure. So I'm going to talk about 2 routines. I've actually only been teaching since July in this program, so I'm still trying to get these really well established as routines, but we're working on it. So you can go to the next slide. This first routine I'm going to talk about is really not a routine yet for very many of my students, but I'm working towards having everybody do a daily goal for themselves and then track their progress in an online learning log. This screenshot is from a handout that I've made to give to students when I'm teaching them how to do this. And just so you know, I've screenshotted a lot of things, and all of my documents are going to be available in a shared Google Drive folder to everyone later on in the presentation. So with this handout, I'm trying to teach students why daily goals are important. It seems like a lot of my students come kind of with the mindset that learning is all about doing worksheets, and doing well in school is about just getting the right answers on these worksheets and on these tests. And I'd like students to learn how to take charge more of their own progress. I think that's really empowering for my students, especially since a lot of them are used to just having other people tell them what they have to do all the time, whether that's their employer or someone in law enforcement or their MFIP case manager or whomever. Students aren't always used to setting goals for themselves and working towards them and reflecting on their progress. And as we know, that's a really important TIF self-management skill. So that's what I'm trying to teach my students with this. Next slide, please. And then, so the place where they're going to write their goals and track their progress is an online Google Doc. And I just have a template that I use, and I make a new document for each new student and just share it with them when they enroll in our program. And then try to teach them, like, the Google Drive and the Google Docs is a stretch for a lot of students, but I think it's just such an important skill for them to have. And it also makes my life a lot easier. With adults who are homeless or highly mobile, keeping track of a notebook is not necessarily at the top of their daily priority list. So this way, everything is all in one place, and I can see what everyone is doing, and it doesn't get lost. And then I'll show you on the next slide. This is what the template looks like. At the beginning of their time when they come into work, they're supposed to just put the date and a SMART goal for themselves. And then they go do their assignment, and then before they leave for the day, they're supposed to come back to their Google Doc and do some reflection on their goal. And I always tell them, if you end up not meeting your goal, that is totally okay. The really important thing is reflecting on what you did and thinking through what happened and what you're going to do next. And then also, with the self-management skills, I'm trying to incorporate some learning strategies. So students are thinking about what they learned and writing it down so they remember it better, and also hopefully thinking about how they learned it and what kinds of learning strategies or procedures work best for them. Next slide, please. So to make this actually a routine for all of my students, I'm working on really being consistent and taking the time with every student when they enroll to make sure that they feel confident and able to access their Google Doc and know how to write good, smart goals for themselves. Since I'm not there 5 days a week, I'm also working with our Minnesota Opportunity Corps navigator to have her help me teach and reinforce this routine with all of our students. I'm working towards training all of our volunteer tutors to discuss daily goals with students, so that just becomes part of our culture in the classroom. And I'm also working on providing frequent feedback to students, either in person when I see them or by using the comments feature in the Google Doc. Questions on that before I move on? Sorry, I haven't been monitoring the chat very well.
No, that's all right. That's my job. So I just wanted to say, not so much questions, but just like kudos. People are super impressed with some of the different things that you're sharing here. Joan says the reflection on their learning and the progress helps to reinforce the lessons of the day. And Laura mentioned that keeping our students keep a written log for each area they worked on and what they accomplished each day. Sue mentioned that the SMART goal element was a really great idea that she wants to add to her daily work record. Yeah, lots of like, yay, I want to do that kind of comments in the chat.
Oh,
yeah, and I was struck by the combination of TIFF skills plus North Star skills happening here, particularly when they're keeping their stuff in Google Drive. And then someone also mentioned that you're also having students keep track of their own work, which is adding an element of self-management and goal setting, and setting them up for success when you're no longer there, perhaps, to help them do that. So lots of good things. Learning logs, in particular, Brenda says, seem to be an essential element in working in a one-room schoolhouse. So yeah, I don't see any other additional questions at the moment, so I'll let you keep going.
Okay, so on the next slide, I'll talk about the second routine I've started just the past few months. Since we really didn't have any whole group instruction, I've started this thing called Lunch and Learn, which I totally stole that title from our Schoology discussions. But just as kind of a low barrier way for people to start participating in some group lessons, because of course I'm working on the CCRS literacy and math skills in this activity, but even probably the most important goal is trying to build some community, because we know that having a sense of community in the classroom is strongly related to learner persistence. And then I just put an excerpt from this text by our executive director, who published a book recently about urban American Indian education. And he was actually writing about our high school, but I've tried to incorporate some of these principles into our GED room as well. We all do sit around a circular table when we do this, and I participate in the activity with the students. Sometimes I will get up and write on the board or chart paper or whatever, but I really try to reinforce that while everyone may have different needs or learning preferences, we all have something to contribute. We can all learn from each other, and I am not the only expert who has valuable knowledge in the room. Next slide, please. So the way this works is people can bring their lunch or a snack. I forgot to mention, we try to get food donations and provide snacks for our students, because we know that food insecurity is a very real issue for many of them. And plus, it's just more welcoming and people are motivated to come together for food. So people bring their lunch or a snack, and we sit down at a table. And we start with a quick write, and I just ask a student to set the timer on their phone for 5 minutes. And the prompt is always write about anything you know about the topic of the text that we're going to read. And I provide some kind of questions to think about, because often students will say, oh, I don't know anything about that topic, but actually they do. And so we do the quick write, and then when the timer goes off, I always give the students an opportunity to share whatever they want to share from what they've written about the topic. And then we will take time to read the article. I do have questions prepared, but I don't pass those out until after everyone has read the article and hopefully done some annotation as well, because I think it's important for students to just focus on actually reading and really understanding a text before they're worried about answering questions. So when I can see that everyone is finished reading it at least once, then I'll pass out the questions. And I'll also always ask students if they have questions or things they want to discuss, because my questions are not the only important ones. And then we'll talk through the questions together. I try to include a chart or some kind of graphic organizer often, so students get experience filling those out. And then I don't do this as consistently as I should, but I try to do an exit ticket. And the exit ticket is not graded. They don't even have to put their name on it. It's just more feedback for me about what they learned, and it gives me some good information about topics for future activities that they might like to read about and discuss. Next slide, please. I also put some language activities on the back of the question sheet, and these are just some nice independent activities that students can do by themselves, and the answers are right in the text because I just copy and paste paragraphs from the text here. I do a mixed up paragraph where I just put the sentences in a different order so students can practice looking for a topic sentence and looking for transition and signal words to put the sentences in a logical order. Kind of trying to prep for all those wonderful TABE test questions where they have to do that. And then editing practice, like the editing activities that Laura had. I just add some mistakes to sentences from the article, and then students try to find them. Next slide. I do also do a modified routine for math content once a week. My math text is often word problems that I've taken from, a lot of my students are using the online Edmentum program, and so like in this example, these were just word problems from a particular tutorial that several students were having trouble with. And then the quick write is just doing that math procedure of noticing and wondering. So I'll have the students write for 5 minutes, what do you notice and what do you wonder about these problems? I might also use a graph or something from visualpatterns.org, anything that can get students thinking about numeracy topics. And then we'll discuss what students noticed and wondered. And then as needed, we will discuss additional questions. I like to do the Annie Feder thing of taking the actual question out of the problem so that students really have to just think about the situation. They have to actually read the story carefully instead of just taking the numbers and frantically starting to do things with them, which is what students tend to do a lot of the time. If this is noticing and wondering or this taking out the question is unfamiliar to you, I included a link to a YouTube video where Annie explains this. I think it's really a great way to get some good discussion doing and getting students to think about how they approach word problems in a better way that sets them up for success better. So actually we can just go to that last slide with the links. So I put all of my materials in a Google Drive folder. that you can feel free to use as you see fit. One caveat, I did not number the paragraphs in the articles because I find it easier to just print them out and do that by hand. So you'll have to number the paragraphs yourself. And then my email address is there if anything doesn't make sense, or I would just love to hear if you end up using these, how they're working for you, or if you have any ideas. So thanks.
Wow, thank you so much. There was a lot of kind of excited chatter here about all the great resources that you're sharing and all the great links. I think what we'll do is make sure, and though we get, of course, the PowerPoint and the recording of this webinar will get up into Schoology, but we'll try and get the Google folder, and a couple of the other speakers had some blank kind of templates that we can definitely upload to Schoology too. So thank you so much for that. A couple things people were noticing was really liking the editing exercises and the mixed up sentences. A comment about it's wise to wait to pass out the questions on the reading until people have all had a chance. So lots of great feedback for you here, Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing. Are there any questions for Elizabeth while we have her? Any clarifications or anything that you want to bring up or ask about? Carolyn says, thank you for some great math ideas that really encourage more critical thinking. I'm always happy when I see notice and wonder and some of those other things that are such great go-tos. The mixed up sentences, of course. Lots of good things. Any comments or clarifications for Elizabeth? All right, well, if you think of something, do let us know. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing about your context. And I'm so struck by how different these contexts are, and yet how, as came up in the chat, how many threads seem to tie it all together too. From the Minneapolis to a prison to Bemidji, like, yes, they look different, but so many of the same elements go through all of them, and so many of the same routines will actually work in all of them and work really well, because some of the things we're tackling, the difficulty with attendance, the inconsistent kind of level in the room, the not knowing who's coming when, like all of those are consistent across all of these settings. So these routines that you've developed, while for very different settings, appear, at least from the chat and from people's reactions, to be things that could really benefit any number of other settings. So that's great to have. Well, at this point, what I'd like to do is for everyone to find the chat box. And I just want to hear from the group. I've gotten to hear some feedback from a handful of you, but I'd love to hear from everyone. What's one thing, either from any of our speakers, from Laura, from Sue, or from Elizabeth, that you might try in your own teaching? What's something that you heard today that you're like, yep, that's something? Maybe it's an exit ticket, maybe it's a message of the day, or who knows, one of the progress logs, or integrating the Google Drive digital literacy work. Like, what's something that you heard today that you think you might use in your classroom? And I'd love to hear what you're thinking about in the chat box. So as we conclude for today, I'd just like to hear from everyone. I just have a couple of announcements before we open it up for questions and such, but let's hear a couple of thoughts about what you might use in your own setting. I have excellent wait time, so keep typing. All right, a couple of things coming through already. Sherry says, thanks to the three presenters. I can't wait to incorporate some of these resources into the work. First thing she's going to try is online learning logs in Google Docs. So great. Joan says she wants to use a form with learners that lets them reflect on what they've learned and what kind of questions they have. The goals in Google Docs comes up again. Making an announcement birthdays area in her room, says Kristen. So that's going to be a fun thing to have next week in your classroom. Absolutely. Carolyn says trying the online learning log and having students type up the everyday edit. Great. Nancy shares putting a world map on the bulletin board and having students put their name and pin on the country they're from. Yeah, a great way to build community. Laura mentions the Google Docs. Sue says, I think having a venue for using an adaptation, something with the Lunch and Learn. Yeah, Lunch and Learn's a great idea. Thank you. Susan Anderson says a benefit from establishing better routine in the classroom and the goal setting by the individual, not necessarily by her. Great. I was struck by how some of the routines were for teachers and some of them were for students, and yet they all work towards the same goal of having just a much more effective, efficient use of your time and space together in your instruction. Melissa says wanting to try the online learning with her ELLs. Yeah, peer tutors, says Laura. Carol mentioned several ideas, posting daily math, the mini vocab in history, online learning log. Great. Oh, I'm feeling a lot of love here. There's a lot happening that people are going to be able to take away and use in their classrooms, or for sure thinking about and maybe visiting the Schoology group to see the templates that are posted in the Google folder that you've shared, Laura. Or Elizabeth, and then we'll see what other ideas emerge. No doubt, lots more things. Is there something else? Anyone? Any questions? Be sure to use the chat box. I'll keep it open here and try to monitor as I can. Laura mentions the need for consistency is so great within our programs. Yeah, absolutely. I was struck by how these ideas kind of fit into two, across the three presenters in the three very different contexts for one-room schoolhouse learning, but it's really two different things. They were either sort of ways to keep individual progress manageable and moving forward, or ways to come together as a group, which I thought was just an interesting contrast too. Carol has a great question. It's like I planted it. How do I access the Schoology group? Well, let me tell you. That is actually my very next slide. So let me just move to that. Yeah, a couple people aren't familiar with the Schoology group, so I'm so glad you're here. So there's a Schoology, it's a group, not a course. So when you go into Schoology, which I believe is Schoology.com, and what I might do is put a reminder in the in the chat in a moment so that you can see exactly how to get in there. But this is the code you need. So once you're in Schoology, and I know many of you are in Schoology already for other things, but there's this code that you'll need to join a group, SP5KP-MNCH4. And what I'll do is in a moment, I'll try and find that link. It's actually to a newsletter article that we've done, and I'll send you that link or put it in the chat box so that you can get the direct link there. But that's the code you're going to need. If you're already familiar with Schoology and you've used it for other things, this is all you need. If you're not, hang in there. I will, at the end of the webinar, put that newsletter article on the screen so you can click on that. So what this is actually I'm glad you're asking about it. This is a fantastic way to stay connected across all of these diverse yet very common one-room schoolhouse sites across the state for ABE, all over the state geographically, all over the place as far as context and like where they're showing up. But what we know is that there are some really strong themes and challenges that run across all of these contexts. And I believe Melissa is on the webinar today. Melissa Briscorum was with us at least at one point. I saw her, but she is our excellent facilitator for this schoolhouse group and is just all of the time constantly putting up great resources and ideas and questions and announcements in that Schoology group. So she joins us from AEOA, and we're so grateful for her leadership on the one-room schoolhouse group. And she actually did a lunch and learn today. It was a good day for lunch and learn. So a couple of comments in the group. A couple of people really enjoyed hearing the ideas. Many people didn't have classes today because of the cold, but we were glad to have time to get to the webinar, so that's great. And yes, absolutely, I'm going to read that one from Kristen. She says, thanks to all the presenters, you're killing it. Your students are lucky to have you. Keep up the amazing work. So that's a great comment. Thank you. I just have a couple more announcements, and that's just to be aware that we have these regional events coming up, and we actually are very much hoping to have a one-room schoolhouse session at each regional. That's the plan. At Metro on March 22nd, we'll be here at Hamlin, and then we'll be in Walker a week later. A couple weeks later, we're in Mankato. So if you haven't yet been to a regional event, I encourage you to do so. You can register usually a month before we open up registration for those on the Atlas calendar. And also just a heads up that summer institute proposals, like it creeps up sooner than you think, right? They're due in early April. And I have a sense that we have such amazing expertise on this webinar that we could have a handful of sessions that could really help people out. If some of the people on this webinar as participants and presenters could come together, maybe find a friend who also teaches in a one-room schoolhouse setting and just have a session where you share what's working and open up that discussion and sharing. Or maybe you have your coffee corner that you could take pictures of and do a poster session or something. Oh, and Kristen joins us as the Summer Institute chair. Feel free to unmute and speak up, Kristen, if you want to say any more about the process. And I think the call's out. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm here.
Yay, give us a plug.
Yeah, sorry if my bulldog. I did not even plan this, I swear. Yeah, so we either will be releasing opening proposals for Summer Institute. I believe the date is coming up soon, like early February. And you know what? If it's something appropriate, maybe I can put it on the One-room Schoology. I don't know, maybe.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so yeah, the proposal will be out soon. And I think this is a topic, actually last year I did a presentation on this at Summer Institute, and it just seemed like something that was well received. Like, I don't think there's enough of this happening in our field, and especially at Summer Institute. So we would just love to have some one-room schoolhouse themed sessions.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's one or two every year, and that's great. But I think more people teach in this setting than we realize. And it's something we've tried to give more attention to as far as things that Atlas can offer. But really, the expertise lies with you all, right? So if you can offer a session at Summer Institute or a poster or a panel, something similar where 2 or 3 of you can get together and share your ideas, that would be great. And I also encourage you, of course, to get to your regional and share your ideas at that as well. So I don't have any further announcements. I do want to just pause here and thank the panelists, of course, and thank you to the One-Room Schoolhouse subgroup on the State PD Committee for all of their work this year. If there's anything in particular you want to ask about or lift up before we close, feel free to do that. We're by some miracle ending early. That never happens. So if you want to stick around and have a little more discussion or sharing or have some questions, feel free to do that. I really appreciate all of the people who stepped up today to share. Thank you for being brave. It's hard to do a webinar if you haven't done one before. It can be very nerve-wracking. So thank you to the brave women who jumped in to do this work for us today. I really appreciate it. If you have any additional questions or comments, please stick around. Otherwise, you will be getting a quick little evaluation at the end of the webinar. Please fill that out. Maybe you have ideas for future topics. Today's was routines, obviously, but there are no doubt other topics that run across all of these varying contexts that as a thread that we can use to help so many people across the state. So tell us what that is. If you want to put forward the name of a presenter, maybe it's you. I would love that. One of the great things about being with Atlas is I get to shine a light on great instruction happening all over the state, but only if I know about it, right? So I don't know everybody. So if you know there's great stuff happening at your site or a colleague's site, please let me know so that we can shine a light on that and bring it forth to the rest of the group as well. There is a terrific culture of collaboration in Minnesota ABE, and one that I hope to continue as long as I can. So we're sharers, and I like that about us, right? So I appreciate the Minnesota generosity happening on this webinar today, and I hope it continues on the Schoology group after. I'm going to leave it there, and for a moment I'm going to go find that link to the newsletter article that talks about how to get into the Schoology group. If you already know how to do that, you're welcome to exit. If you have other things you want to go try and start your car, whatever it is that you need to do this afternoon, you are welcome to do that. But hang out for a minute if you've not yet found the Schoology group, and I will get that to you in just a second. Anyway, thank you so much to all our presenters and to those of you who chimed in on the chat box. Much appreciated. Thank you.